Hello, everyone. Welcome to this very special evening. I'm Josh Davis, the Executive Director of the Institute for Christian Socialism, ICS for short. And tonight we're hosting an event with legendary union organizer Jane McAlevey. This event is the kickoff for our second Bay Society cohort for ICS members in 2022. Although ICS is 3 years old now, this is the inaugural year for our membership program. Our very first Bay Society gatherings began in January and concluded in June, with those members going on to become ICS partners. And we're very excited to say that we've more than doubled the number of members that will be participating in our Bay Societies in the second half of this year, from July to December. Most all of those members are here with us tonight. Just a bit of information about the format for the evening. The first hour or so of tonight's event is public and streaming to YouTube. That will be Jane's presentation to us on organizing in Christian communities. And after her remarks, we'll bring the public streamed portion of the event to a close, and all ICS members will have a chance to dialogue with Jane directly about the various issues that arise for organizing within Christian communities and ways to think strategically for lasting change within them. And a few notes on protocol and etiquette for those of you that are in the Zoom call. First and foremost, be sure to stay muted during the talk and live Q&A. Please only unmute once you're in the breakout rooms after the initial part of the talk. You're encouraged, though, to use the chat throughout the event to say hi, interact with each other, share resources, etc. And feel free to keep the video on or off during the talk. That's up to you. If you have any technical issues or problems, just send a direct message straight to Aaron Anderson, and he should be able to help you. He's working behind the scenes, and he's already solved some technical difficulties along the way. But nobody's here to hear me talk, but I do want to say something about who and what ICS is before we officially begin. As I said, we were founded 3 years ago, but we were founded in response to the very palpable need for a public, organized, and radical Christian left. We were painfully aware that there had been a time not so long ago when Christians played a key role in the emancipatory struggles of the world, in the US, in Europe, and in Latin America in particular. But unfortunately, for many, that history is either forgotten or it was never known at all, with Christianity becoming synonymous to many people, and understandably so, with the most reactionary forces in politics today. What may be even worse, though, is that unlike the most successful organizers of the past, the left has no strategy for unleashing the creative and transformative power of emancipatory religion, conceding that force and its potential to the right wing. And ICS exists to change that. We're here to revive the memory of an emancipatory Christianity, to make our own contribution to it, and to fight the reactionary perversion of the good news. We are a nonprofit membership organization, but we're not a traditional advocacy or mobilizing organization. When you join ICS, we connect you with other anti-capitalist Christians and institutions around the globe to facilitate the work of collaborating, creating, and organizing that must happen if the good news that Christians say they're about is to be credible at all in today's world. You can find out more about our membership program by going to christiansocialism.com/membership. Now, our guest tonight, Jane McAlevey, is an enormous influence on those of us who founded and lead ICS, and she continues to shape our work in numerous ways. Jane is an organizer, author, and scholar. She's currently a senior policy fellow at the University of California at Berkeley's Labor Center, part of the Institute for Labor and Employment Relations. She's the author of 3 books, her first book being Raising Expectations and Raising Hell, published by Verso Press, and it was named the most valuable book of 2012 by The Nation magazine. Her second book, No Shortcuts, Organizing for Power in the New Gilded Age, has been enormously influential on us, and we have our members read selections from it in their Bay Society meetings. And her third book, A Collective Bargain, Unions Organizing and the Fight for Democracy, argues that the survival of American democracy depends on rebuilding unions. And so with that, Jane, I hand it over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Josh, for that lovely introduction, and I am delighted to be here with all of you. I'm delighted for several reasons. One, I think the mission of the work that you're trying to do is urgent, frankly. And secondly, because I think the sooner that we find a pathway to building more power in a way that's grounded in a tradition of faith that is meaningful and purposeful and not divisive and destructive, as I think we've seen too much of, the sooner we're going to start making progress on a lot of really important issues. So I am delighted, and it's been a pleasure for me to get to know Josh and Aaron just a little bit over the last year of them patiently trying to get me into a space where I could spend some time with you. It's a busy time, that's for sure, in the trade union movement. So I'm going to just run you through how I'm going to do the discussion. I'm going to give a PowerPoint-based talk, which I'll start in just a minute, or even less than a minute. And then again, I'm excited because I feel like the parts of any engagement I have with people are when we get into discussion and Q&A. So I'm going to use a lot of visuals. My slides have less words and a lot more visuals because I'm going to do some storytelling a little bit along the way. So I should be speaking for about 40 or 45 minutes, looking at my timer now. And then we'll have a little pause, as Josh mentioned. And I look forward already to having some discussion and dialogue with you. So I'm going to dive right into the presentation. And I am going to, there we go. And I am if I'm speaking too quickly, I'm gonna count on Aaron or Josh to let me know, because I tend to get very excited when I talk about organizing. So I framed this winning in hard times, where class, race, gender, and faith sort of convene and converge. And I will say that I'm gonna focus really on what I call structure-based organizing. And I'm going to walk you through really an example of how we do it in the trade union movement, or how that's a fantasy. Let me say how some of us do it in the trade union movement. Too few of us, actually. And we tend to be the ones who are still winning big campaigns. And you're going to see, and I'm going to quickly get to, that in my life in the trade union movement, though I don't personally identify as a member of a particular faith, I have spent a great deal of time with the faith community, and that's for a couple of primary reasons. One is, one of the first things I was taught as a young organizer is that which matters to the members must matter to the organizer. And in my life, in the trade union movement, the vast majority of workers I've worked with, and we're talking tens of thousands, in fact belong to houses of faith. And therefore, as an organizer serious about understanding what drives and what shapes how workers come to something like a unionization fight or a contract fight, the role of faith is huge. And it's non-denominational, right? There's all sorts of faith communities that I have spent a great deal of time with and in, and it's been some of the most joyous parts of my work, including at very hard moments. I can remember in a campaign I'll talk about when I get to the end, finally deciding that I was going to go to an every Wednesday, what was called Hour of Power, at a Faith Tabernacle Baptist church, because the pastor, Tommy Jackson, was so dynamic and so incredible that in the middle of every week when he ran his Hour of Power, it actually, once we had established a relationship through the members of the union who were in his congregation, I would often find myself just walking over to the church for that Wednesday Hour of Power, because it would actually get me through the week, not just about 800 of his parishioners too. So that's just to give you an example. I've literally spent a lot of time with and in many houses of faith. So that's the context for it. And I want to just get rolling. Josh gave me a lovely introduction. And I just want to say a couple of more things. These are images that sort of shaped my life and my childhood. I am the daughter of a politician in the state of New York, and he was a very progressive politician. We just lost him a year and a half ago, actually. He made it to almost 98. He was a World War II fighter, a trade unionist, came from a union household, and made it back from World War II, which a lot of fighter pilots didn't make it back from World War II. Many fighter pilots don't make it back. And I'd like to think that a lot of my early life lessons about building power and how to win came from being the daughter of a progressive politician who literally had been a fighter pilot. I feel like he put some of that gene into my gene pool. Um, but also learning what it meant. His politics were sort of Bernie Sanders politics, basically. Um, and what that meant for me as a young girl was that I grew up in a house of campaigns, where he would win or lose, right? So learning the value of winning or losing, and then learning what it meant to actually implement a rather progressive, if not by today's standards, downright radical public policy agenda, uh, no question shaped me. And the UAW on strike signs, the boycott lettuce signs, the for people who don't know, the image on the top left is the original Earth Day flag from 1970. That's Angela Davis, who my father, in some infamous moment, had to take on his own chief of police to make sure that she could speak at a community college when there was a death threat against her. These were all things that shaped my very early years, being on picket lines, and such. And then as I grew into my own adulthood, one of the earliest places I worked was at the Highlander Center in Tennessee, an image up on the right. Uh, I moved to the South, and I thought I needed to learn what it meant to live in each region of the U.S., and the South was the second one I moved to. Also a community of faith deeply engaged and around the Highlander Center in Tennessee. And by the time I took on my first trade union campaign, I forgot this picture was in here. Remember the one on the bottom right with me in the room with flip charts on it, because that is a young me in an early trade union campaign working to stop the gentrification of the city, in which we worked. And that was a big meeting with members of ours who were also members living in public housing that was slated for demolition. And that is about a 30-year ago. No, 35. I don't know. I'm a lot older than that picture now. So that's just a little bit about my background, sort of what shaped me. I don't have to spend time on the books because Josh did. But I like to say that my life has been a series of mostly practice with a little bit of theory. I do long periods of hard campaigns, and then I pause to write books about them. And just so you know, you are getting me on book 4 minus 7 days. I'm in a crazed state of mind right now, putting the final touches on a manuscript on book 4, which is called Power and Participations. So there'll be another one in there sometime soon. So let's get into the talk. I have to start by saying that these moments we're living in blow my mind every day, because there is so much crises all around us, and meanwhile there's a bunch of guys having a lot of fun, and they're the rich, and they're the super rich, and they are profiting like mad right now in a pandemic, not caring at all, seemingly at all, about how many workers they kill, whether it's Jeff Bezos and the Amazon factories that in some ways led directly to the successful unionization of the first Amazon plant in Staten Island, as he and they didn't care to have any safety protocols. It led, of course, to Chris Smalls deciding to walk out, demanding safety standards in the facility 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years ago, no, 2.5 years ago, yeah. So, they're off buying yachts, building rockets and helicopters, and I don't have to go into it with you because we want to talk about how to beat them. But it's literally the engorgement of the super rich is so even more offensive than normal to me, based on the misery that they are causing all around us. And Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, are two iconic figures of the sort of Rockefellers of today, right? If we go back 100 years in time. And I, like an example of so many is a little headline in the bottom of this slide where it's from February 3rd of 2022. It's a recent headline from Transport News that says a historic Dutch bridge that survived the World War II bombings will be dismantled so that Jeff Bezos' new $490 million mega yacht, the largest sailing yacht ever built on planet Earth, can be released from the Dutch shipbuilding company that has built it for him. I kid you not. So that's just the moment of greed and power that we are in. So I want to get to what do we do about it, because that is my favorite topic. And I'm going to argue that there are two things that our side has to do and that we're not particularly good at right now. The first is that for our side to win, for ordinary people to win, high participation is a prerequisite to power. Like, that's the big asset we have, is our numbers. And people like to talk a lot about the 99% versus the 1%. And I have to say, actually, as an organizer, that slogan frustrates me a lot. Because if that was true, if it was simple enough to just point out that we're a majority and they're the vast minority, they wouldn't have $490 million mega yachts while their workers have no masks. So it's not that simple. And it rests on our ability to manifest our large numbers. And it's not even just can we manifest them. Having been through a lot of hard campaigns in my life, there's something else we need besides high participation, which is unity against division, right? I mean, these guys are masters of sowing division. And what I used to think was reserved for anti-union trade union campaigns has essentially, taken our society writ large at this point, ever since the orange-haired man who we shall not name got into that White House and unleashed effectively the same kind of tactics of sowing division and polarization that I'm used to in hard campaigns. So we need strategies to build unity against division. We need what I call tight, effective workplace structures. And in your case, we're going to be talking about tight, effective structures in the faith-based community, but also, I hope, in the workplace and elsewhere. And we need to be able to manifest it, as I said, which to me is something I talk about as building demonstratable and sustainable majorities and super majorities. So those are the things we need. High participation coupled with unity, effective structure, and demonstratable and sustainable majorities. And they make up essentially 5 core concepts that I'm going to run through, pretty quickly, but I'm going to do it primarily again with slides and stories. And so hopefully it's going to carry us into a good discussion after my presentation. So quickly, the 5 core concepts in words before I illustrate them. The first is what we call structure versus self-selecting. The second is what I call leaders versus activists. The third is majorities versus minorities, by which I absolutely mean numeric numbers, not some reference to any ethnicity or something like that. The fourth is what I call an approach, if you're a trade unionist, to the whole worker, to seeing them as whole people in their communities, not just a sort of worker when they are at work. Versus what I call or think of and have experienced, and probably a bunch of you have too, sort of top-down community labor alliances. And sort of what that all adds up to me, is what I define in the book that Josh mentioned, No Shortcuts, as organizing versus mobilizing, or activism. Meaning if you're operating in what I call a structure-based environment, and you're focused on identifying what I call organic leaders, which are the people who have capacity to bring large numbers along and help you get to high participation. And you're focused on building majorities, not minorities. And if you're in the trade union movement, if you're focused on looking at the whole life of a worker, who's got all sorts of complicated issues in their life that needs addressing, not just, a raise at work. That is what adds up to real organizing, in my experience and in the way I try to articulate it in books. So let me just start with this one because it's fundamental to the rest of them. What do I mean by structure versus self-selecting? When I think of what a structure is, it's on the left. It's a workplace. It's houses of faith. It's public schools. It's big apartment complexes if you live in one. It's someplace where people come together, not because they already agree on every issue under the sun. By definition, a structure is a place where people are showing up for a different reason. And even though someone might argue that, well, a faith means you're self-selecting into a faith-based institution, I think you all know already there's a ton of divergent potential political ideas going on in one house of faith. So, and certainly part of what I love about trade union organizing is that it presents for me the possibility to understand how to be effective in uniting people in very large numbers who really share no issue, identification, or political ideology at all. What they share is a boss. They need a job. They take a job, they have it. And that's a workplace. So that's what structure means. And in academic lingo, I learned later during my late in life PhD, they call structures bounded constituencies. I just call them structures, but for the academics in you, it's a bounded constituency. It means there's a set number of people against which we can measure is the work we're doing succeeding or failing. And I contrast that in No Shortcuts, which was my PhD dissertation, again, late in life PhD dissertation. I contrast that with what I call self-selecting, which are places where people choose to come together because, in fact, they agree. And that's a lot of single issue campaigns. If we're talking about the United States, it's women's groups, it's Occupy Wall Street, it's single issue environmental campaigns. It could even be Black Lives Matter. And believe me, as I say all of those things, I am not diminishing the role of self-selecting movements in our work. In fact, they're central. They're just different, right? So this is not a value judgment. It's starting off as a core concept of just distinguishing our understanding of what is structure-based organizing versus what is self-selecting mobilizing, right? You get to do mobilizing generally once you've got a base of people who agree with you. And my life argument is most of the left spends most of their time in the self-selecting world and has no idea if they're building power. Whereas in structure-based organizing, it's quite measurable whether or not we're building sufficient power to actually have enough power to win what we want. And that's what I'm going to walk you through, using examples from the trade union sector. Essentially, in structure-based organizing, we know if we're building to majorities every single day by the methods that I was taught as a young trade union organizer. And I'm sticking with it. For all the flaws of the U.S. trade union movement, of which there are plenty, a good union is just an extraordinary force in the life of the workers who build them. I feel like, just to articulate it a little bit more, the left spends most of its time living in what I call the easy to get 1/3 versus building governing power. And governing power is what the Christian right has been really effective at building, for sake of argument. I mean, the people that I'm hoping that the reason I'm spending time with you is because I hope that you become very powerful, because the people who occupy the space of power and who understand governing power right now in the faith community are dominated by, evangelicals who I don't have to tell you about them anyway. So this is like an illustration to me of, what majority versus minority power means. A symbolic strike on the right-hand side more typical of sort of like the fast food workers stuff that's been going on for the last 5 or 10 years. A couple workers outside with a sign, the restaurant's open, the place is open, there's no real disruption. It's a symbolic protest of sorts. Versus on the left, where you build a supermajority strike and everyone's out together, and the factory's closed down, and you've actually built power, and you have the power to create a crisis and force the employer actually into real negotiations with you. Um, so I feel like the older I get, the more clear I get about the issue and the challenge for us, which is to build governing power. I don't want to spend time talking to people who I agree with my whole life, although that's an important place to go. It's not going to save the planet and all life on it and make a more just society, not in my experience. So what I want to do is get right into it. I just want to walk you through how we do it, like what it looks like. How is it that we take all these concepts I've just mentioned and actually put them into motion? And I'm going to walk you through. I think when people were signing in, I saw at least one person from Philly, maybe someone named Connor, maybe, I'm not sure. Anyway, I was just noting people in the chat when you were coming on. So I'm going to just cut to a very big campaign I helped lead that was set in Philadelphia in 2016. And I'm going to zero in on just one aspect of it, which was one hospital called Einstein, the Albert Einstein Medical Center, where I was the organizer and chief negotiator for the workers. So I want to go right into methods, because there are methods for every single thing that I just spoke to you about, and this is what I want to, this is not a training. You're not going to leave a 30-minute more conversation with me understanding all of these methods in detail, though we do have a free online training program for them. This is going to give you an understanding of the concepts. So this is what we call big wall charting. And big wall charting can be done when you're working in a structure, in a structure-based environment. This could be, if this was tenant organizing, there might be 10 big buildings, and this would be one of the buildings. But this is a workplace, and it's a big hospital, and this is 1,000 nurses and 1,000 nurse campaign. And for every department or unit in the campaign, we have a wall chart. That's going to be our guidepost and tell us whether or not we are achieving majority and then supermajority participation. So the concepts that I've just mentioned, I want to illustrate right now. So this is one department, SICU, which is the Surgical Intensive Care Unit. And everything on this chart you're looking at, it's about the size of a flip chart. You'll see it in real life in a different picture. You'll see it in relationship to a person. But think of it as the size of a flip chart on the wall. And in this department, everything you see on this picture represents what I'm going to call a structure test, right? We're in a structure-based environment. This is one wall chart of one unit for one hospital. And I'm going to show you what a structure test looks like in a minute or two. But first I want to explain to you how we understand how we're building majority and supermajority power. And they go together, wall charts and structure tests. So everything in the picture you see, which I'm going to explain to you, is a structure test, every dot and color, except the black lines, because I just blacked out the workers' last names, right? So other than the black line, the yellow lines, the orange dots, and every little star and thing and yellow highlighter you see represents a different structure test in a campaign, which can be applied to any structure-based environment. A synagogue, a mosque, a temple, a church, fill in the blank. Any bounded constituency. So what you're looking at here is every single worker in this department. And not the workers coming to union meetings, every worker. We start by just handwriting the name of every single worker on a chart. And for those who don't know it, in a union context, the employer doesn't give us these names, just to be clear. Just like they won't likely be given to you. We get them creatively. We start talking to workers. We ask them to take photographs of phone lists. There's all sorts of things we do, schedules, etc., right, to sort of build these lists out in the early stages of building a unionization campaign from the bottom up. The phase we're in now in this particular fight, we had the workers had actually won the election. And we were trying to get the employer, Einstein, allegedly a nice community institution in Philadelphia. That nice institution, and turns out in the reporting that came out 2 years later, spent $1.1 million trying to break us in this campaign. So I just want to give you a sense of the hardness of the campaign I'm talking to you about. It came out in an Economic Policy Institute report 2 years ago on union busting, and it shocked me because I knew it was a hard fight when we were in it, but I didn't realize it was going to be one of the highest expenditure campaigns in the country. To give you a sense of how much money they were spending to beat their nurses for daring to think that they deserved better standards. Uh, Amazon spent 4.3 million last year fighting their workers. So that's the whole corporation, Amazon, for the whole United States. This is one hospital in Philadelphia spending $1.1 million fighting these nurses. Like, it was mind-bogglingly hard fight. So just to give you a sense of it, why we have to do all the work we do, and why it ultimately builds governing power. We start with all the names. We put all the names on the chart. And the blue dot you see on there, it's coded on the bottom of the chart. The blue dot means they signed the authorization card to form the union, to even have the election. The green dot means that they signed a vote yes petition. Now that's a harder ask, and I'm going to show you pictures of these because it's a public petition, and not a petition like you think of, a petition like only the people in that unit, only the people in that hospital are allowed to sign it, like only the workers. And it's higher risk because they're going to march it on the CEO. So the CEO is going to see all their names. So if the blue dot represented a sort of secret test of were we at majority in the surgical intensive care unit, everything else represented what we call a public structure test, which is higher risk. And we're escalating the risk as we take each structure test. The red dot meant they signed a public petition demanding the employer drop the legal charges and kick out the union busters and start negotiating. The yellow dot versus highlighter meant that they filled in a contract survey. The yellow highlighter across their name was about 5 months into the camp. You're looking at about 5 months of work. So this chart is like 5 months of work in a hard campaign. So the yellow highlighter across their names means now they've actually signed a membership card to pay dues to the union. So just to get a sense of it, this is a very strong unit. This unit, all these pictures are at the same time. This unit is labor and delivery. And you can tell right away, which is why I still use this method. This is only one of the reasons I still use this method. Is because it's super visual, and you begin to learn very quickly right away, and this would totally apply in faith-based organizing, that you're much weaker in this unit. Not everyone is doing everything. There's a little cluster there on the day shift, which is the top part, in the middle, where things seem to be happening in a pretty coordinated way. But the labor and delivery is kind of messy. Like, some people are doing some structure tests, but they're not all participating in all the structure tests. And I just want to contrast that for a minute. Surgical intensive care unit, labor and delivery. Now I'm going to show you a picture of telemetry. Picture is taken at the same time. What in the heck do you think is happening in that unit, where no one is basically doing anything? And this is where we begin the story of what organic leaders mean. What's happening in telemetry is that there's a very powerful leader, and I want to contrast a leader from an activist. In telemetry, which is a very big unit, there's a leader, and she is fiercely anti-union. A leader. So these are very important concepts. She is a leader, by my definition, because she leads people. And she is running the union busting campaign in the hospital against her co-workers. And her name is not crossed out because I've written a book chapter about her. Her name is Marnay Payne. And she's quite fine that I have written a book chapter about her. She's proud of it, actually. And now we're friends, which is different than maybe back when I took this picture. And I want to contrast her with the one person who has 3 dots next to her name on the chart, which is on the night shift. On the bottom left, Elizabeth Bourgogne Miller, really Liz Miller. And Liz is the activist. She's the only pro-union activist in that entire department. And Liz would show up to every union planning meeting throughout the whole campaign. And Liz would dutifully take assignment to go get everyone to sign up on everything. And Liz would come back empty-handed. And that is because Liz is a beautiful, fun, adorable. Her name isn't covered over because she's also deeply in the chapter I wrote in A Collective Bargain telling this whole story. She's great. She's a singer, a songwriter. She was the head of the Pennsylvania Association of Songwriters when I was in Philly in 2016 in this campaign, and she's wonderful. She's a feminist. She fought to get nurses out of skirts, like when she was a young nurse in the late 1970s. Who doesn't love Liz Miller? I love her. But she didn't have the influence over her peers that Marnay Payne did on the day shift. So I want to just go back now again and show you the contrast in these slides. In the surgical intensive care unit, what this meant was that we had the correctly identified real leaders, what I call organic leaders and no shortcuts, on both shifts, and both of them were highly functioning and they were building their union, which is why every structure test was getting done by almost every worker. That's really high participation. So those leaders were breaking pro-union. Labor and delivery, this kind of messy one in between, for an organizer means there's one of two things happening in the unit. Either we have the wrong leaders identified, or, as it turned out in labor and delivery, we actually had the two correct leaders identified on each shift in that unit, day shift and night shift, but they weren't taking their job as seriously in terms of building the union in labor and delivery, as the leaders were in surgical intensive care. And they certainly weren't taking their job as seriously as Marnay Payne was, who had her unit on lockdown. This is 5 months, the same meeting. There's nothing going on in that unit. That is the equal side of the power of an organic leader. And in a trade union campaign, and I'm going to argue in a house of faith, you know, if there's a lot of Marnay Paynes and you don't understand or have a strategy for how to persuade them from being anti-union or anti-whatever your effort is, you're not going to win. Simple. End of discussion. You're going to lose. Like, that's the method of structure-based organizing, and that's why this method to me is so very powerful. So this is telemetry, same unit. It's called Tower 5. Telemetry at Einstein Hospital in Philadelphia lives in what's called Tower 5. So the same exact wall chart, about 24 hours after Marnay Payne changed her mind and decided to finally join up with her union co-workers in every other unit. Meaning, in 24 hours, an organic leader signed up a majority of her unit on union membership cards. And it wasn't by beating them up, it was by how much respect she commanded among them. Now, that wall chart will never ever look like those because they came in at the 5-month mark. Like, that's literally, they signed up at the moment. This picture is from the moment when Marnay Payne changes her mind and decides to join the union, which I'm sure we'll have some discussion about during Q&A. Because that is the second part of the essence of our work is how do we do that? What are the methods? But suffice to say, at the 5.5-month mark, Marnay did change her mind. And she immediately built a super highly functioning supermajority membership union in her unit. So what are these structure tests? Here's a picture of the workers working at a meeting. We're at a shift change meeting, and the workers are kind of early in the campaign, and they're all walking around looking at their wall charts, and they're all together. Second reason I love this method, they're all together very easily. It's not a database, it's not a printout in a notebook. They're all walking around and looking at each other's units to see who's strong, who's weak, who's being successful, and who's not. And they're trying to figure out in a group discussion, that's the medical intensive care unit team. Pat Kelly on the left is now the vice president of PASNAP for any of the Pennsylvania members here. The whole statewide union, that man on the top left is now the vice president. At this point, he was a younger member in 2016 trying to get to the negotiations table. So the structure tests are these. They are hand-signed petitions. This is a real one from Einstein. This was the red dot that you saw. And they're hand-signed for a reason, which is that asking, if you're trying to build a powerful high participation organization with a lot of unity, asking people to commit in writing to something is very different than asking them, you know, do they agree to show up at something? Again, in academia, which was, you know, came very late in my life, after 25 years in the field, I learned, just like there's the word bounded constituency, there's also something called commitment theory in behavioral psychology. And I was like, well, every union organizer I know understood that theory long before I read it in a book in my PhD program. Because literally the act of a worker signing that they commit to stand united is really different than just saying that they will. And these are the Einstein nurses on the 27th of June in 2017, about to march. It was actually curling up. It was so big. We hadn't mounted it yet. But marching their first ever supermajority hand-signed petition to the CEO to tell him to drop his legal charges and kick the union busters out and get into negotiations already. And you can tell that they're very proud of themselves because they've done something that's really hard, which is getting a supermajority of nurses in a high fear campaign with union busters walking around threatening to fire you to actually take that kind of action. So structure tests are endless in structure-based organizing, and I'm just going to show you a few more of them from many campaigns, but I'm not going to show you many. But they're literally, like you could see on those wall charts, we were already at sort of 6 or 7 of them in the pictures I was showing you. So every time you finish one of them, you start the next one, because each one is showing you on those wall charts, are you building majorities in each unit? And then ultimately in each hospital. And in the case of this fight in Philadelphia, we had 7 hospitals. So we had called a giant meeting at the world headquarters of the Friends of the American Friends Service Committee, of the Quakers. I remember we had to rent their building because we needed a place to put up like 500 wall charts so that every single worker in the city could actually walk in and be blown away and look at the level of power we were building hospital by hospital and unit by unit. So anyway, this is another example. This was a 5,000 person unit. I'm sorry, 8,000 person unit in Clark County in Nevada. And there were 5,000 hand-done signatures on it. That took us months to do and revealed how weak we were and how long it took to do. This is another picture from much earlier in this decade with hospital workers in a fight in Las Vegas. Same moment, they've hit their first majority petition and they're about to deliver it to the CEO, which again is a high-risk taking action. This is a majority photo poster, even higher risk, right? If we're trying to get workers ready to walk off the job and strike, we're going to continue to increase the risk factor because the ultimate structure test in a trade union campaign is a strike. So this is in Germany, actually. And what you see on the right are the workers working on their wall charts. All that nitty-gritty work happens cross-culturally, across continents. I'm teaching this all over the world now. And these German workers went on a 30,000 worker strike in Berlin last fall in the pandemic and won the best contract in German history, just to put a point on that. And this is another example of a structure test. This was the amazing Karen Lewis, the head of the Chicago Teachers Union, at the strike vote for the Chicago teachers in 2012. And they did not fill the Opera House in downtown Chicago. They didn't just call for that meeting not knowing if they were going to fill it. They had done, as I wrote in my book, No Shortcuts, about 5 big structure tests, all those hand-signed things you saw and charts and whatnot, to know that when they called for that massive strike vote and filled the Opera House in Chicago, they were going to fill it. You don't call a meeting like that and invite the press if you don't know you're ready. That's why we do structure tests. That's the why. It forces a high participation organization, and this is totally relevant in my mind, and I hope it's making sense to you for faith-based organizing. And the method makes you systematize that you're reaching out to talk to every potential person. That's what contrasts it with self-selecting organizing, where you call a meeting and you're just happy with whoever shows up, versus that you're literally every day trying to get to 90% participation and unity, if not 100%. The second reason we do them is because it actually builds the organization. It's not just a snapshot. The act of each structure test is helping you build your organization stronger with every single structure test, because you're identifying and clarifying who are those organic leaders, who can get the work done, who's got the respect of their co-workers. And so you're testing and assessing the capacity of your leaders and sorting who's an activist from who's a leader, which is going to be crucial when the boss starts firing people in the case of a union campaign. So we've now walked through most of my concepts, wrapping to the last one, which is going to begin to dovetail into where does the faith-based work come in addition to that every one of the methods I just showed you could be used in a faith-based organizing context. I'm switching now into the concept called whole worker organizing, that I mentioned as the fourth of the big concepts. And under whole worker organizing, and this is maybe the one contribution that I think I've added to this work, as in addition to just clarifying it for a lot of people and lifting up methods that were once used more strongly in the 1930s in this country, when socialists dominated the trade unions in the 1930s. I came from the community organizing side and from the Highlander Center, but grew up in a house of trade unionists, right? Then I began to do community-based organizing and environmental justice work. Then I moved to the Highlander Center in the South. And all of that meant that by the time I became a full-time trade union organizer, I had already spent a decade working with people on issues outside of the workplace with their houses of faith. So the idea that when I went into the trade union movement, I was just going to see a worker as a worker with relationships that I just showed you how we understand and chart them at work was absurd to me. I was like, workers are people, and they got a whole set of relationships at work and when they punch the clock and go home. And if they're in a faith-based community, as an example, those relationships may be as powerful and important as the relationships they hold at work. So I began to use the term whole worker organizing and to systematize what the trade union work taught me early on with those wall charts, which my mentors taught me, was, oh my God, I got to systematize this for like the work outside of the workplace too, which is what I then began to call whole worker organizing and treat it just as systematically as I did charting connections and relationships inside the workplace. So it sees each worker as a whole person with concerns inside and outside of work. We understand that the members have important relationships at work, but also outside of work. And we take on issues that I call non-workplace issues. I don't even like to call them community issues because it implies that the workplace is not a community and that wages don't matter in the community. So I literally identify semantically workplace and non-workplace issues. Because to the worker, their brain doesn't sort winning a $3 an hour raise matters versus my house is going to be bulldozed in a gentrification plan. Like, tell me which is more important if you're the worker. I'm not going to prioritize for them, right? If you're going to lose your house, if we just won you a $2 an hour raise, but your house is going to get bulldozed in a gentrification plan, to me, that's the job of the union to fight on that issue. Sadly, that's not how most mainstream unions see their work. And in this work, the community, in the way I think of trade union work, the community, and especially the faith community, is foundational. I argue in No Shortcuts that the most powerful source of leverage for workers outside the workplace, meaning outside their capacity to strike, is in their own community. And that's where the role of faith becomes so unbelievably important. So I began to call it comprehensive charting, right? If wall charting is what we do to understand workers' relationships and the power among them in the workplace, I thought I've got to try and make this as comprehensible to the trade union folks I worked with as I could. So I began to call the method comprehensive charting, which meant that we would put each worker in the middle and begin to chart all of their community connections just as systematically. Where do their kids go to school? Who's their spouse? If they live with their aunt, uncle, grandmother, if you're doing an immigrant worker campaign, you're going to have a whole gigantic extended community. And you're probably going to have a faith community. And their kids are probably going to play on a sports team, and maybe the adults are going to play in a sports league, and maybe there's a book club, and who knows, right? The point is, unless we get intentional about learning all the ways that a worker has or a member of a parish has to the broader community, we're not going to know it. So this is a very intentional approach to understanding all the relationships that people hold. And in the first trade union campaign I did it, which I'm going to wrap this story on in about 3 minutes, I think, was in Stamford, Connecticut, where we fought this wicked gentrification campaign, and boy, did we win. We won everything in those years. We won unions, we won housing, we won a lot. And you can see the early version of it. These pictures are almost 30 years old, almost as long as I've been doing this work. So you can see it in 3 languages. Somos la Unión, Somos la Comunidad. You can see it in Haitian Creole. We had a ton of Haitian workers. Nous c'est Sindicata. And you can see it in English. And you can see that the second question we're asking the workers is, are you a member of a church, synagogue, mosque, or other religious institution? Second question that we're going to get into with the workers to begin to systematically understand where were they in the community in relationship to that chart I showed you. I'm not going to dwell on this because I realize actually it's so old, but I don't know all the names blacked out. But on the left you can see the church's name: St. Mary, St. John, St. Gabriel, St. Cecilia, Little Zion, Sacred Heart, Greater Faith Tabernacle, the Hour of Power I used to go to, Our Lady Star of the Sea, etc. And those workers, this is like before computers, honestly. I was still typing, I think, back then. But anyway, like on something. We didn't even have Excel spreadsheets, which we do now, or databases. But what that led to is the picture that you're looking at. And it was in the Stamford Organizing Project. And this is actually all in my first book, Raising Expectations and Raising Hell. And what we built was something called the Stamford Organizing Project. And this is an image of it from the year 2000. And there were 4 unions by the end of it was a multi-union campaign we built, organizing across multiple sectors of low-wage workers: hotels, to hospitality and hotels, janitors, healthcare workers, childcare workers, and then municipal government workers. And those are the 4 unions: the United Auto Workers, Local 531 of SEIU, 1199, and the Hotel Workers, 217. That's what those numbers are. And what you can see is that we built a really powerful clergy team by charting our members' relationships, and the key churches are in the middle. Again, Bethel AME, Greater Faith Tabernacle, Calvary Baptist, St. John's, Sacred Heart, First Congregation, Union Baptist, and Faith Tabernacle. Those were the most powerful institutions. And so we had also done a power structure analysis, and I was trying to figure out which of our members and which of our unions attended which of those houses of faith. Because if we could get all of them united with us, we were going to become unstoppable. And that is, in fact, what happened in that city in those years. We frankly built an unstoppable machine, took over the city council, stopped the mayor's gentrification plan, won the first funding for affordable housing in forever. It felt like, right, all the housing was dilapidating, which was their excuse to then bulldoze it, which we did not let them do. They never bulldozed a single unit in the city. It's quite a legacy to it out of this campaign. And then you can see below, we took the same approach to building a tenant union. So the unions literally built this huge clergy organization, and we built a huge tenant union. And we built it in the same way. We charted where did every worker live. Southfield Village, Oak Park, Custer Street, St. John's. St. John's was not a church in this reference. This is a housing unit. Connecticut Avenue, Merrill Avenue, and Fairfield Avenue. These were all housing developments that were either middle or low-income housing, federal or state subsidized. And in the mayor's plan to gentrify the entire city, they were going to bulldoze every single one of these houses. And I'm going to wrap my story by saying they didn't, because we beat the living crap out of the mayor and the entire big business community. And you can just see a sampling of the headlines here. I was scrambling to find these slides earlier. They're all so old. Workers' tenants protest outside Malloy's home. That was the mayor. He went on to become the governor, by the way. I like to say we puppy trained him when he was mayor to become a very pro-union governor. He was very anti-union when this work began, and very anti-black person, and very pro-gentrification, and could care less about workers. He literally went on to become one of the most pro-union governors several campaigns later. So the good work of training the mayor, as I say, into better behavior paid off when he became the governor of Connecticut. But so those are just some of the headlines in the campaign. And you can see a mix of clergy and faith and race coming together in the anti-gentrification fight. And then you can see it paying off with clergy workers getting ready to back nursing home workers in the biggest nursing home strike in the history of the United States. Clergy workers hear health worker complaints. I mean, there was nothing that we did in that campaign that didn't make headline news. So I'm going to close and stop by saying what I said in the beginning, which is the left needs governing power. And that campaign I just walked you through, both of them led to what I would call governing power, where we literally governed, and the elite did not. And that is what we need a lot more of. So I'm going to stop there and turn it back over to Josh, I think, to segue us from this moment in the meeting to a separate moment in the meeting.
Thank you so much, Jane. These are such hugely important ideas, especially for the work that we're doing here, but it's also so important for people of faith that are involved in this kind of work to begin to think in these kinds of ways about how change happens and to get invested concretely in their communities and how to change it. So thank you so much. This will conclude the public portion of the event for this evening. ICS members will now head into a participatory Q&A with Jane. Anybody out there in YouTube land who feels like you're missing out and is interested in becoming an ICS member, you can go to christiansocialism.com/membership and find out more and sign up. I want to say thank you, Jane, for being with us tonight. Thank you to everyone on YouTube. You can find Jane at Twitter with the Twitter handle @RSGEXP, and you can go to her website, janemcalevey.com. We are the Institute for Christian Socialism, which is a nonprofit organization committed to building a movement of the ecumenical Christian left. And you can learn more about us at christiansocialism.com and follow us on Twitter under the handle @SmashMammon. If you'd like to support our work, go to christiansocialism.com/support. I'm your host for tonight, Josh Davis. Go in peace, love one another.